Hi and welcome back to a somewhat frigid workshop for the second episode of the Firebird ukulele build. And in this episode we're going to be cutting a lot more material away from the neck section and getting it to look something a little bit more like a musical instrument. Okay, so back on with the Firechick, and what I want to achieve in this episode is to try and get the neck section of this somewhere a bit closer to where we need it. We did the headstock last time and that's pretty close, but the rest of it, as you can see, is bloody miles away. There's a number of things I need to do. I need to kind of get these transitions finalised into the neck itself from the headstock. Then I need to establish the taper and get that cut onto the neck blank. And then I also need to kind of get rid of a whole heap of this material. And also, you might not be able to see, but the headstock is actually massively tapered, so I want to kind of thin that down and get that more parallel. So there's a whole lot of cutting needs doing, but before we can do any of that, there's an awful lot of marking that needs to be done as well, because at the moment I have no real understanding of where everything's going to get laid out on this thing. So I think the easiest way we can go about this is to get the other little Telecaster tenor uke onto the bench, and we can use that to reference and get some measurements from. Okay, so at this stage I'm not actually too concerned about mega precise measurements in terms of fret position and everything. What I want to establish really are the width of the nut, which we got at about 34mm. We established that last time. I also want to get the kind of length to the end of the fretboard and the width of the fretboard at its widest point. From there we can also get some measurements kind of at the thickness of the neck as well. So I'm going to get a pen and paper, take some measurements, record them, and then we can start working our way onto this one. So we know the nut's 34mm. And to the end of the fingerboard we've got 287mm. And that's from the nut. Now, when I fretted this, what I actually did was I borrowed someone else's tenor uke. I put a piece of masking tape onto a straight edge and I kind of marked on that where the frets were. It seemed to have worked quite well. I'm not going to do that this time though, because obviously I've established these fret positions from there, so there could be errors, and what I could be doing if I do that again is compounding those errors and kind of making it worse. So what I'm actually going to do is use probably the StewMac fret position calculator, and then I'll just fasten the rule to the fretboard when we get to that stage and mark as accurately as I can that way. Should be absolutely fine. Okay, so next measurements I want to take is the kind of fretboard at the 18th fret, which is kind of its widest position, and that's 44mm, we'll call that. So with that established, I think we can actually start to transfer some of these measurements across onto the new one. Okay, so I've already got a nut line on there, so the first thing I'm going to do is measure down that 287. Which will give me the end of the fretboard. And then I just need to mark out my 34 at this end and my 44 at the other end and join up with some straight lines between the two. From there I can establish what that curve needs to look like into the headstock. And then I'm just going to use this template here just to draw in these kind of transitions that we need. And actually that one that was already there fits pretty well for the top. The bottom not quite so much, but I can just slide that across a little bit. Put that in like that, which all looks lovely. And then just to make sure I can see these lines properly on the bandsaw, I'm going to use some of this blue vinyl tape on there just to mark it, hoping that it's going to stick. Usually it does. Okay, get this to the bandsaw. Okay, so that's kind of cut mostly to shape now. We're very close to where we want this to be. So next up is we need to cut a lot of this material away to get the neck thickness right. So to start that process, I'm just going to take some fairly rough measurements from the nut for the first fret, which is about 24 mil. These don't have to be massively accurate at the moment. And then I need to find a fret that is before we start to transition out of the neck. I'm going to go for the 10th fret, which is 188 mil from the nut. About there. And then I'm just going to take the electric spanner and just take some kind of rough measurements in those two positions. Now these are going to be quite fat measurements really, because obviously we've got the strings on and everything, but it will give us a half decent starting point of where we need to be. And I'm actually going to cut this kind of fairly close to where the body starts initially. We are going to have to thin this section down because it's way too fat, so I won't finalise this transition until we've done that, but this will give us a good starting point. So we can just get this back to the bandsaw and get that sliced off. Okay, so that's quite a lot of that material moved now. That is still fairly chunky. Now, you might have spotted the deliberate mistake, and that is that I haven't allowed for the thickness of the fretboard. So what I'm going to do is very quickly, I'm going to take about another 5 mil off that. Get this back to the bandsaw, whip that off camera, and then we can crack on with the next bit, which will be to get this onto the bobbing sander and just clean up all these transitions. Okay, so that's thinned down to a more reasonable thickness now, so I'm just going to get this onto the bobbing sander and just clean everything up. And we should be good to go. Okay, so there's that all smoothed off. A little bit of work to do at the back of the headstock there, but we can sort that out at a later date. And that is actually starting to look a lot more ukulele-like. So really happy with what we've managed to achieve there. So I think logically the next step for this is to kind of push on from this stage and start work on the fretboard. And to match what we did on the full-size build, I've got a nice piece of Wenge there. But that is going to be for the next episode. So as always, hit that like button if you've enjoyed this, subscribe, etc. And I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye bye.